Hey, I'm Jared Brantley, the Chief Automation Officer here at Raven Automation. Today, we're going to do a live tutorial on how to build a small sub-workflow to help us identify status IDs from ConnectWise Manage service boards. So one of the unique things about ConnectWise specifically is that service boards have their own set of statuses. And while those statuses may be the identical names across all service boards, each service board has its own set of statuses with its own set of unique IDs. This creates an issue for us as we're building automation, as when we're updating tickets, we need to know the exact status ID that we're going to use across all of our automations so that we put things in the correct place. So let's do a quick demo of how that needs to look. So as a best practice, I've already built out a workflow shell with just a simple set of placeholders here to explain exactly what we need to do in this process. So the first thing we need to accomplish, we need to define our inputs for our sub workflow. We need to list all of the service boards that we're going to be using. We need to find the target board that we're going to be getting the statuses from. We need to list the board statuses from that board. We need to find the target status ID, and then we're going to need to output that result. So let's jump in. Let's start out with setting our inputs. So we'll edit the workflow. We're going to go to Input Configuration. First thing we're going to do is set SR board name. So that's just going to basically be our service board name. It's going to be a text field. Let's make it a required field. The next one we're going to use SR status name. It's important that we clearly name all of our variables. That way, anyone else that's working on this knows exactly what we're doing. So we're going to save that. And we can take this item off the list. Now, the next thing that we're going to need to do here is get a list of all of our service boards. So that said, in the ConnectWise PSA integration, there's a lot of different things that are available. We're going to try to speed this up and use the search function up here to list service boards. There it is in our list. Let's drag this out here. Now, as another good practice, we should always rename actions to exactly what we're doing. Since this is a PSA, I like to rename it as PSA list service boards. So, great. Now, we're going to need to set a filter for what we're doing because we're looking for a specific board. So under our conditions, we're simply going to say name equal. Let's click our little ginger burger to open this up in the editor because that's a little bit nicer. Open our quotes because this is going to be a string. Open our ginger brackets up. Looks like I got an extra one there. Let's back that out. And we're going to need our context variable, which is our input. So SR, and there it is, SR board name right here. So this is going to set a condition for this call to return only the board with this particular board name. So that's going to satisfy listing all service boards. But what we really need to do is get the target board ID from this. So in order for us to do that, we're going to want to come into our transition down here. And what that's going to ultimately look like, when we run a list action, it's going to return the results in the form of an array or a list. So that means every result returned is going to have an index number. So what that means, we're going to come in and say SR board ID. That's going to create a data alias or variable. For us to populate that variable, we need the results from this task. So we're going to access that by saying tasks dot PSA list service boards dot result. Now, remember I mentioned an index number. So let's open a bracket. The first result is always going to be 0. We should only get a single result here because we're putting in the exact name of the service board or the exact string. And the property that we need to return is simply going to be the ID property. So let's close that. So when this action runs, it's going to grab our board and it's going to populate this SR board ID with the board ID variable. So that's going to satisfy our list all boards need and our find target board. The next thing that we're going to need to do with this is get all of our board statuses. So let's look for list service board statuses. We'll drag that into our list here. And let's rename this. So now we've got that renamed. Now up here, we need to specify the board ID. So let's open our Ginger Burger. We've got that in place. We already created that board ID variable from the previous action, so let's add that. So now we have our target board in place. We need to set our condition. This is almost identical to what we were doing previously. So we're going to go name equal, set our quotes. We've got our Jinja syntax here, or let's create that. Now we're feeding in that status name string. So what that's going to do is make the API call should only return the specific status that we're looking for off of the specific board. So we need to do the same thing that we did previously. We're going to create a variable called SR status ID. And now that result, just like before, is simply going to be tasks dot list board statuses dot result. And again, we're going to have that same ID here because this is a list action. So we need to specify that index number to get our first result. And that's going to output that. So that's going to cover our list board statuses and find board target status ID. So the last thing that we're going to need to do here is set our output result. So let's go back to edit the workflow. We have an output configuration item right here. So what we need to do now, we can set this as workflow output status ID. And simply hit our little ginger burger again, open this up, and our output we're going to populate with our SR status ID. So let's submit this. Let's get rid of our output result since we've fulfilled that now. Let's go ahead and publish our action. And we would normally want to log our changes. In this case, this is now ready for testing. So we have that saved. Let's test this. So I'm going to use my account management board and let's put in my waiting on client status. Let's test this thing out. And we'll go ahead and view our result. So that's running right now. It should be pretty quick. We can see that it's now finished. If we load our workflow context, we can see our output SR board ID is 29. So that worked. So now how do we use this? We've got a demo update ticket workflow that's waiting right here. The first thing that we would want to do is set a ticket in progress. So let's take what we have built here and let's drag our tutorials sub workflow that we've just been working on. So we had that output variable that we had set. So let's take that. We'll drag it here. Let's make a copy of this and drag it here. So by taking this and taking this sub workflow over and over, we can set a status ID property on both of these. And then we can go back through. Let's look at our execution results from this previous step over here. We can see our workflow output status right here. We're just going to copy that. And we'll say result dot workflow status output ID. And with that, that's now going to output those status IDs. So we could go to each one of these actions, put in our ticket number that we're updating and reference that variable. And now we have a reusable sub workflow that we can use to update a ticket status over and over and over again without ever rewriting that code. And that's how we take advantage of sub workflows to handle smaller functions like getting the status IDs from ConnectWise service boards. Thanks for watching.